Not all heroes wear capes. Cory Booker, Joe Biden, and Gerald Nadler on this episode of The Uprising.
LibertyNation.com. They are the resistance, but we are the uprising. With Scott Cosenza.
I felt this thrill going up my leg.
There's not going to be a President Donald Trump.
A president! Can you believe it?
This is somebody who knows what's right and what's wrong.
You know what podcasts are, by the way?
Talk shows for people who cannot make it in talk radio.
I just want to say to the men in this country, just shut up, do the right thing for a change.
I think possibly that's the most unattractive form in which prejudice can be met in this country, is the rage of the entitled.
Lord save us from the presidential aspirants. Well, as somebody who was run out of New Jersey because of gun control, I think I have a sort of particular prickliness to New Jersey politicians coming for my guns. I had to move several states away to feel a little bit safe for not only having the right to keep and bear arms, but to live under a government that wants me to have that right, that is okay with that right, where neighbors say we're better off with our neighbors armed rather than disarmed, and only agents of the state having guns. And it's always important to remember when we consider these things that the state is force. It is about do this or else. Welcome back to another edition of The Uprising, a podcast of LibertyNation.com. And this is your host, Scott D. Cosenza. When Cory Booker looks around, what does he see? He sees that the problems in society are caused chiefly by guns, and only by taking them away from his fellow Americans can we really start on the pathway along the road to peace and prosperity. Never mind, of course, that the liberty that Americans have was first gained by its own citizens owning guns. When the Patriots took to the green at Lexington and Concord, they did so with their own arms, or ones they had stolen from the British. It wasn't government-supplied police arms that created this republic, this country born in liberty. And we will lose it, for sure, if government agents are the only ones that are allowed to keep and bear arms. It would seem like the most progressive anti-establishment or anti-Trump person in the country would be equally on the page of don't take our guns away. If you believe Donald Trump is the worst of the sort of hysterics about him, right, that he's some kind of white supremacist, half a Klansman or worse even, right? There's that lie that he said there were good people on both sides of white supremacists in Charlotte that I always have to debunk. Well, if you believe that to be true, as so many of our fellow Americans seem to, the never Trumpers or anyone but Trumpers, why would you be okay with the government agents being the only ones who have guns? Don't you see that you benefit as a citizen from having a gun? And Cory Booker's assault on gun control is sort of particularly ironic, given the fact that gun control started in this country as a way to keep newly freed slaves from attaining a full measure of rights in this country. You know, how do you keep blacks on a virtual plantation with Jim Crow and everything else, and lynchings? To say the worst of it, well, keeping them disarmed for sure is a great way to. Because I'll tell you what, you go to somebody's house to lynch them and they have a gun in there. That's a whole different equation. And those of us who advocate for freedom and not this rule by one group over another, we're okay with everybody having guns. One of the lead plaintiffs in what eventually became the Heller case, the famous case that established once and for all that the Supreme Court said the Second Amendment protects an individual rights, was a man called Tom Palmer, who is a gay guy subjected to violence because of his sexuality, and says, the police aren't protecting me. I have to be able to protect myself. And the only practical means to do so is with a gun. Well, to Cory Booker, we'll find out just what kind of person he is. Senator Spartacus released his 47-point plan for taking guns away from his fellow Americans this week. And make no mistake, this is not some third-tier part of his platform to gain power over the rest of us and be president of the United States. It is seemingly the number one thing in his campaign.
Why do you think you're going to be able to change that?
Because to me, and it's not just me, it's us. This is very much like the civil rights movement to me, where people said, oh, civil rights legislation kept dying in the Senate. The longest filibuster ever, Strom Thurmond's racist rant against civil rights legislation in the face of Birmingham bombings, in the face of Goodman, Cheney, and Schwerner dying in Mississippi for voting rights. People did not give up. They doubled down. They expanded the moral imagination of this country. We have to understand that this is, to the core of who we say we are, a nation that believes in life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This is being devastated. Life, the freedom from fear, the pursuit of happiness when your family members are dying or your community is seeing these kind of losses. This is fundamental to who we are. I will not surrender the basic idea of what it means to be American to fear and carnage. We are going to win this fight in the same way we won the civil rights fight, not by resigning ourselves, by saying we cannot wait and coming at it with a moral emergency and getting more people off the sidelines and into the fight to win. As President of the United States, we will win this fight because we will bring a fight like they have never seen before.
So it's now a moral emergency to take guns away from our fellow Americans, law-abiding Americans. And it's a battle akin to the civil rights movement. And that's how hard he's going to go at it. This effort to strip the civil rights of Americans is akin to the civil rights movement. Well, there's all sorts of odious measures in his 42-point plan. Let's go ahead and take a gander at some of them here.
You propose a mandatory interview for every person who would like to purchase a gun. Tell us a little bit more about that. Who would be doing the interview? Would that person be the ultimate decider on if an American can buy a gun? And what would they be looking for? And on top of that, would they get a second shot at an interview ever? Or is this person decide yes or no for the person's lifetime?
Well, let's not exaggerate what this is. It's actually really simple. We do it for passports. We do it for TSA pre-check. We make sure that the documentation people are putting before aligns with the truth. And so this is just basically licensing. We do this for people who are driving cars. It's
but
not,
so I understand the interview would be a more factual interview. You know, are they who they are, not an interview about their mental health or assessing their ability to have a gun and use it judiciously.
This is not something new. We do it in many states. Connecticut did this, and they dropped the gun violence in their state by over 40%.
We'll get to that claim about the Connecticut gun violence in just a second. But before we do, there's actually a sort of a buried lead here. In addition to the overall just gun licensing that's going to be required. So every American who wishes to own a gun is going to have a federal gun license that allows them to permit a firearm. If you happen to live in one of the free states, you don't know what this is. It's a common way that states that don't wish to have people have guns restrict them and frustrate their attempts to do so. New Jersey, Senator Booker's home state, is known to do that, as is Connecticut. You have to have a license to even go buy the gun, sort of like a pre-approval to exercise your right to keep and bear arms. So this would be at the federal level. He says that in the plan, they could seek the gun license at a designated local office widely available in urban and rural areas. Well, yeah, we promise, right? And if one is not widely available, where's your recourse? Well, I don't know where it is. But what's interesting is that he says that you can go there to present your credentials that you're eligible to own a gun. And those include passage of a certified gun safety course. Now, as a NRA certified firearms instructor, this would be welcome to my wallet, to be sure. If every American has to be certified by a trainer to get one of these new federal permission slips to get a gun, well, don't we just cash right in on that? But it's a completely new. There is no right yet discovered in the Constitution that requires this sort of training or permission slip. So how it's going to be overturned, how he's going to overturn the Heller decision is not mentioned in this. Senator Booker says that after Connecticut passed a suite of gun control laws, that their gun crime rate was reduced massively. Well, some of those laws that he's talking about, they do have a gun licensing provision, like a gun owner licensing provision. If you want to buy any gun in Connecticut, you have to apply for just a license to purchase a gun. As a matter of fact, you have to get that license or one form of it simply to purchase any ammunition in Connecticut. It's a staggering requirement. Don't go to Connecticut on a weekend and expect to be able to go to the local sporting goods store and buy a box of shells, because it ain't going to happen. You have to present yourself at one of 3 government offices around the state and ask them for permission slip to then go buy ammo. Well, gun crime and all sorts of crimes can sort of have political massaging of the numbers. It's one of the features of one of the greatest television series ever made is The Wire. And one of the sort of refrains that we learn from that is you can always trust the homicide statistics as a bellwether for a crime rather than the other ones, because it's one of the very few that they cannot massage or fake. Okay, so back to Connecticut and Senator Booker. Well, if we look at the murder rate per 100,000 people, sort of how it's commonly expressed in these statistics, in 2017, last year, for which looks like the completed numbers are in, Connecticut had 2.8 murders per every 100,000 people. And that has fluctuated somewhere in the 2s or even in the 3s since the year 2010. I'll run 2010 to 2017. 3.7, 3.6, 3.3, 2.5, 2.5, 3.2, 2.2, 2.8. Okay. Those are all the number of people per 100,000 that were murdered in that state. Well, let's take a little time machine back to the prehistoric era when there were almost 0 gun control laws. Before the Gun Control Act of 1964, before the Assault Weapons Ban in 1994, before the Gun Control Act of, 80? Doesn't matter. Here's the numbers from 1960 starting to 1969. 1.61, 1.3, 1.8, 1.8, 1.62, 2.4, 2.5, 2.9. So in 1960, when a 12-year-old with a pretty profitable paper route could have bought an assault rifle or a firearm that Senator Booker would call an assault rifle, mail order with cash, the murder rate was 1.6 per 100,000. But today, where there's all this licensing, gun controls, import controls, can't buy mail order, can't buy sight unseen, got to buy in your local state, age of majority, all that business, it's 3 times as high as the murder rate. Why is that? If more guns and access to guns, legal access to guns, which is what this legislation is designed to do, to throw up loopholes to legal access to guns, if it's going to make us safer, why don't the numbers show that it was much less safe when there were almost no gun controls? If he's going to strip Americans of a right so precious that it was the second one listed when the founders listed the rights most dear to them and most important that the government not trample on, it's the Second Amendment to our Constitution. Don't we deserve some better explanation other than his promise? What the hell happens when we're left with no guns and a more violent society and nothing to protect us from it? Or a person who really is a white supremacist who wins the presidency of the United States, or really uses violence against people in a way that patriots would stand up to meet with violence themselves? Well, I'm sure that in that case, Senator Booker will issue a very heartfelt apology. Here he is with sort of a famous lie about gun regulation in the United States and what he's going to do to change it for the actual, so the manufacturing regulations with the Consumer Products Safety Commission.
You've promised also to close some loopholes on gun sales. Why do it that way as opposed to working on a bipartisan solution?
You know, the way the NRA and gun manufacturers have done this is in an insidious way. They've actually literally made us change the lens of what is reasonable, as they've eroded just the common sense we have. Think about the Consumer Product Safety Commission that has exempted guns. There's more regulation now on toy guns than there are on actual guns. We've been letting them dictate the debate for too long. It's time that we dictate what is common sense in our country.
Yeah, letting them dictate the debate, he says, is the gun lobby. But the truth is that Americans came together and said, we won't let them dictate what we can buy. And the them is the Consumer Products Safety Commission. When it was formed, guns were exempted from it so that they couldn't use political mischief to ban guns. The Consumer Product Safety Commission was established to help protect Americans from products introduced in the stream of commerce that are defective for use. So water heaters that have valve placement that makes them likely to blow up, baby cribs or car seats that may kill your baby. That sort of thing is what the Consumer Product Safety Commission was designed to protect against and to help us warn against. And the fear is that the people who hate guns but can't get them banned because of the Second Amendment or because their fellow Americans don't want them banned will come at it from a side door and sort of an oblique attack against these rights. And in fact, the Consumer Product Safety Commission prohibition against regulating firearms is not some sort of backroom deal slipped onto page whatever of a bill. It was openly fought about in the 1970s when the commission was created. With the CPSC and guns, it has been political since the outset. In 1974, the Committee for Handgun Control Incorporated filed a petition before the commission to have all handgun ammunition banned in homes as a hazardous substance. This is the kind of thing that we're defending against, not some rifle or a firearm that misfires or fires when you look at it and is a danger to the public. No, they are trying to get a backdoor ban in, and it's just disingenuous to say otherwise. You know, Booker himself rails against the National Rifle Association, and we're going to get to his points on that in a minute here. But according to the NRA's own self-history, it's this Consumer Product Safety Commission ban that gave birth to the NRA-ILA, or the NRA Institute for Legislative Action, which is one of the groups that they hate the most, because that sort of brings the political power to bear against the opponents of the NRA. But it was a defensive measure. Gun grabbers, Ted Kennedy amongst their chiefs, were trying to use the mechanisms and levers of the government in a way that was unforeseen by the people who passed the legislation to begin with. It's a products safety group, not a we're going to take your rights away. It would be like if a bunch of crazy Republicans got in there and said, oh, we're going to ban all the machines necessary to perform an abortion. That's the kind of level of thing that we're talking about here. It would be ridiculous for them to do so, to try to ban abortions through a CPSC action, as it is for Ted Kennedy and and now his legacy, Cory Booker, to do the same. Well, his plan, Mr. Booker's plan, Senator Booker's plan is even worse than Mr. Swalwell's plan. Now, Mr. Swalwell says there's a buyback. And I have to actually compliment, I think it's Poppy Harlow from CNN, who is actually holding Booker's feet to the fire a little bit and demanding some answers about some of these plan details, which we're pretty light on. And she goes on to talk about to Mr. Booker that Swalwell says we're going to offer a buyback so that you can sell your gun to the federal government, which at least mitigates the taking aspect of this law. There are, these guns are not inexpensive. Many of them are quite valuable. And to say that we're going to ban, and just so you're clear on the numbers here, there are estimated, I think the last number I saw was 5 million AR-15s in the United States of America. And that's just that particular brand, or excuse me, that particular model of this type of firearm. This is something that's going to be, what could it be, 15 million items that are going to have to be taken, all of which are worth hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of dollars. Well, that's a pretty big loss to the people of America in terms of their assets. At least with Swalwell's plan, you get the money for your gun. What does Booker say about that?
Eric Swalwell has also, like you, proposed an assault weapons ban, but he's proposing a buyback program where Americans who currently have those guns could sell them, essentially, to the government. But if they don't, within a certain period of time, they would be prosecuted, so subject to be thrown in jail, perhaps. Are you supportive of the same measure?
Well, first of all, when I was mayor of the city of Newark, again, I have a record on dealing with gun violence. We did a lot of gun buybacks and even other creative ideas that I think we should have when I'm president of the United States. The critical thing is, I think most Americans agree that these weapons of war should not be on our streets.
But would you prosecute people? Do you support the government buying them back? And if not, potentially people could go to jail if they don't want to sell them back. Yes or no?
Again, we should have a law that bans these weapons, and we should have a reasonable period in which people can turn in these weapons.
So he's unclear in his response whether he's willing to go for the buyback. And I recognize that there's no buying back, meaning these guns were never owned by the federal government in the first place, nor any government to be bought back. They're simply being seized. But we can say that seizure with compensation is certainly better than seizure without it. And Booker seems kind of vague when he first says it. And so she gives him a second chance. And she says, will you buy them from the people? And he says, essentially, no. He says, what we need is a law that bans them and a reasonable amount of time to turn it in, not a reasonable amount of time to turn it in with compensation. So that seems like a clear enough answer for me to say that he just thinks we should forfeit. Gun owners should just forfeit their property for the imagined safety benefit he touts. He also says most Americans agree that these weapons of war should not be on our city streets. Well, did you first lie to them and say that these were weapons of war? Because all the weapons that we're talking about here, these quote-unquote assault weapons, are not used by the American military in their wars because they're less effective for combat purposes. The AR-15 assault rifle you hear about all the time, not used by the U.S. military. That's it. It's not a weapon of war. Does the average American know that when they're polled about whether or not they should be banned or not? I'm guessing the ignorance level among the non-gun enthusiast public is pretty high on this point, used to Senator Booker's advantage. So it's a civil rights type question. It's supported by most Americans, and it features common sense proposals.
And so I'm coming at this full bore, enough of this seeming to resign ourselves to this level of carnage in America. This is a common sense plan that the only people that should be worried are those people who seek to do wrong by Americans.
The only people who should be worried are people who seek to do wrong by other Americans. How nice that you have pre-qualified opposition to your proposed legislation fundamentally altering the Second Amendment rights of Americans and their physical property, billions, probably it could be trillions, I don't know, of dollars of physical property. And it's just the evil people that are opposing it. You can't be well-intentioned or misinformed or simply mistaken. God forbid. No, you must be evil if you oppose this. That's to say nothing of his unironic use of full-bore support for this common sense plan to strip all Americans of their most practical means of self-defense and the rights to enjoy same. We'll all get to live in New Jersey, even if we live somewhere else. reluctantly, this humble servant of the people, let us know the type of hero that he is.
My whole career has been about running towards problems people said were impossible to solve, but being very pragmatic and bringing together uncommon coalitions to produce uncommon results. And the best evidence of that as a United States Senator is people told me we couldn't pass comprehensive criminal justice reform with a Republican president. Well, I led that on the Democratic Senate side with Dick Durbin, and it was accomplished by being pragmatic and working across the aisle to find common ground.
So what Cory Booker just did there was he said, they told me we couldn't pass comprehensive criminal justice reform, but we got that done. Him and Durbin did it. In spite of the Republican president, they said it couldn't be done. Well, it couldn't be done with a Republican president who opposed that package of legislation. We didn't have one of those. In fact, we had a Republican president who was a Republican. He's not a typical Republican. He's Donald Trump, and that's how that legislation got passed. This is the criminal justice reform that Kim Kardashian lobbied for, that Donald Trump approved, that what was key to getting its passage was not getting a single Democrat to vote for it as a Republican majority in the House and the Senate when it passed, but was to get some Republicans on board who were blocking the legislation. That's what was needed. So I just present this, in his big moment to talk about this new legislation. What does he do? He introduces a lie, this fraud, that somehow Cory Booker was instrumental in getting this legislation passed. He was a yes vote. That's all. He didn't make any moves, broker any deals to advance that legislation forward, to do some legislative compromise or anything like that. It's absolutely ridiculous. And to suggest it adds to his bona fides as some sort of grand legislator, well, it's I'm sure another part of the fiction that he will use to try to build himself up as he becomes attempts to become the Democrat nominee for president. But he's going to have an uphill battle, and that's because there is a gorilla or an elephant in the room there, and it is our immediate past vice president, Joe Biden. And here is our Biden report for the week. Dialing in from parts unknown, LibertyNation.com, The Uprising's Joe Biden for President correspondent Tim Donner joining us. Welcome, Mr. Donner.
Oh, well, thank you. And I just want the listeners to know what a sacrifice it is for me to be the Biden correspondent for The Uprising. I've done it at the expense of all my other professional duties, my family, my faith, everything is being poured into this very most serious and ominous responsibility, Scott. I just wanted
That mirrors the commitment of Senator or immediate past Vice President Biden himself to the cause of public service, Tim.
I was actually doing a countdown here of how many seconds, not minutes, but seconds, it would take you to use the phrase immediate past, Vice President. Your new favorite term.
You could look at Joe Biden's massive financial wealth and that of his sons and think that somehow he was some sort of capitalist. But no, Tim, public service is where he's chosen to make his mark on the country. And it's in that spirit that we turn our attention to his campaign to be the next president of these United States and your analysis of same. What has the week done with Mr. Biden and his candidacy?
Well, I think one of the things that's been hanging in the air, and all of us have waited with breathless anticipation, was for the president to determine exactly what Joe Biden's nickname would be from here until either he loses the nomination or loses the election in 2020, Biden, that is. And he looks to me, after an initial sort of rollout of Sleepy Joe as one possibility and 1% Joe as another possibility, given his dismal performances in two previous runs for president, it appears that the president has settled on Sleepy Creepy Joe, tweeting out this week. And he also believes that, Scott, that he'll be facing Biden in the general election, fresh off a poll in New Hampshire, showing that Biden is ahead by 36% to 18% for Bernie Sanders in Bernie's neighboring state, the state right next to his own beloved home of Vermont, the president now believes he will be facing Joe Biden. And then he rolled out his new demo nickname. And I want to get your take on this, Scott, because it's
yeah. Well, I had really thought that he had settled on that other one, that just Sleepy Joe. I didn't realize there was still others in the offing. So I salute that. In fact, I think pursuant to your reporting earlier on this podcast was just my knowledge of Sleepy Joe, which I thought really fell short of the mark. I consider President Trump perhaps one of the best trolls in America, and I look to him, for high quality trolling. And I must say I was disappointed with the other one. But Sleepy Creepy Joe, that might actually get some traction. That might be good.
Sleepy Creepy Joe is pretty good. I mean, the question is whether it has the same snap as Crooked Hillary, which, of course, worked so well for so long for the president back when he was merely a candidate. But the president tweeted out this week to his more than 60 million followers, looks to me like it's going to be Sleepy Creepy Joe over Crazy Bernie. Everyone else is fading fast. So the president is, I think the question is, Scott, is he relishing facing Joe Biden, who's, by the way, with the media saying that the president is really scared of Biden. President is really trepidatious about having to face him. The president is certainly not showing that face publicly. But I wonder, of all the candidates, how Trump would rate Biden as a likely opponent versus all the others. I don't think there's one of them who feel that he's remotely scared of, but I wonder if he's more trepidatious about Biden than he is about the other candidates.
Tim, the one of the most attractive, I think, arguments that Donald Trump made to the public for, to vote for him, the case for Trump, if you will, was his denigration of the swamp and the establishment types that have done so much to bring our country down. And it seems like it's a no-brainer that he'll be able to continue those attacks apace with Joe Biden as the Democrat nominee, rather than somebody else who could be, like a Pete Buttigieg. You can't really, even though he is, I know, like a total establishment guy because of his background, he doesn't have that lifelong voting record. Yeah, it just seems like, how can progressives get excited about a man who literally wrote the crime bill that is responsible for so much of what they loathe? Overcriminalization of poverty and blackness in America was largely written by Joe Biden. So if I were somebody who's managing Trump, I would think, gee, we could do a lot worse than having this guy as our opponent.
Well, what the Trump team intends to do, and there's a good piece in The Atlantic this week, which used to be a respectable publication, and now it's turned, completely left-wing, Trump deranged, and all the rest. But they had an interesting.
I used to be a subscriber, as a matter of fact. It was so good.
Back when it used to be a respectable a publication, but the piece this week is entitled "Trump's Allies Want to Clintonize Joe Biden," and then the subheading is "Donald Trump supporters want to erase the line between an old white man and the person who might have been the first woman president." So clearly, what the Trump team wants to do is turn Biden into just a natural, not progression, but a continuity from the Hillary Clinton campaign, in the sense that he stood for everything that was overturned by the voters in the 2016 election. He's basically ideologically completely simpatico. Not a dime's worth of difference between him and Hillary Clinton in terms of their ideology. They're old-time sort of Democrat establishment, corporatist liberals, and the Trump campaign is planning to depict creepy, sleepy, is it sleepy creepy, or is it creepy? What is it?
Tim, that's for you to tell me.
I don't want to confuse the listeners. It's very important to know what the president's nickname is. But they want to turn Biden into another Hillary Clinton without the charm, or maybe with some charm, but he's not a woman. And I just love it, from this article, Scott. I gotta read this part from the article in the Atlantic, which engages in some good analysis, but also a great deal of wishful thinking. Here's what the Biden campaign team's response was to the Atlantic saying that they had discovered really that Trump's strategy will be to try to depict Biden as another Clinton. Referring to the Biden campaign team, they write, they also believe that running against Trump will allow the 76-year-old former vice president who first came to Washington, D.C. 47 years ago to come off as the candidate of change.
Jeez,
now,
it's hard to believe they're that ridiculous.
If you're not doubled over laughing at that, Joe Biden as the candidate of change. I mean, do you
I
really
think it just demonstrates their sort of shamelessness that they think they can actually get away with selling that to people. He himself seems to think, you know, in that gaffe of a non-announcement announcement where he talked about being the most progressive of the candidates.
Yes.
During that very conversation, I mean, to say that he's progressive, and I'm somebody who loathes a real progressive, so I'd be happy to. It's so funny. Like, why would you want to call yourself that if you're not? Because it's so off-putting. But of course, he's worse than even just a progressive, because a progressive with sincerely held beliefs, at least you can talk to. But he's a guy who's just, you know, he's a tool of the banks and who's ever paying his bills for him. And he's totally corrupt, and he doesn't care about progressive values, which at least while their methods may often be totally distasteful, if not disgusting, some of their goals are at least laudable for equality and to lift people out of poverty and so forth. But Joe, it's just whatever Citibank wants, you know, that's what he's for.
Yeah. Well, I think if I was Joe Biden, what I would do would be to go into the debates, which, by the way, are going to begin at the end of June 26th, 27th. They're going to have 2 days worth of debates with 10 candidates on the stage each night. So 20 of the 22 candidates will qualify for that first.
Tim, I know what I and Donald Trump will be doing on those nights.
Oh, I do too. You know, I'll tell you what. Just watching the Twitter response from the president on the Democratic debates will be must-see TV, must-see entertainment. But if I'm Joe Biden, what I would say, I'd simply declare that I've been a progressive forever and just let it go at that. And if all the 21 others who are all progressives, real progressives in the field, and they say Amy Klobuchar isn't, but she stands for all the same things. If I was him, I'd just declare that I'm a progressive, or declare that I'm just as progressive as anyone in the field, and just move on from there instead of going into the particulars and let them spend all their time trying to claim that he isn't.
Even, by the way, if they will, Tim, I saw a very interesting headline, I think it was yesterday, whereby Kamala Harris declined to differentiate herself from Senator, or rather, immediate past President Biden. And she was basically given the opportunity to say, you know, why are you a preferred candidate over Biden? And she basically gave one of these non-answers like, well, that's for him to answer why he's a good candidate. Meanwhile, Bernie learned the opposite lesson. Bernie learned that lesson from his Hillary race, which is when you get a chance to distinguish yourself from the candidate you're running against, you better take it. You know, that's what you're there for.
And what Bernie did was, when they asked him if you know, but Joe Biden claims he's a progressive, Senator Sanders, what do you say to that? And he kind of gave a dismissive smile, which wasn't contemptuous, but it was dismissive, in saying, I think the voters will be able to see which of us is the true progressive. So, you know, again, you've got this alignment of a radicalized Democrat base of, you know, coastal progressives, and you've got the voters that they have to win in the heartland, that they have to win back in Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. And, you know, the burning question is, how can they do both of those things? And how can Biden toe the line between being someone who isn't threatening and doesn't scare the bejesus out of the American people, and yet is faithful to and yet is faithful to the growing Democrat socialism, which is dominating the party. How can he walk that kind of line?
It seems like that his affiliation with Obama has done him very well with respect to the black vote and the black primary, as it's called. He seems to be polling exceedingly well there, especially as there's a kind of rejection of Kamala Harris as not, being African American. So like who's gonna collect the lion's share of those votes? It may be Joe Biden. Here's one other thing, Tim, that I think this is the kind of thing that fascinates me, and I know that just to broadly interest you as well. There is also a race for vice presidential nominee. There's a race for vice president in the sense of, especially for these women candidates, if it's a man who's the nominee, they're very, very well may be an affirmative action pick for vice president, where they say, all right, we've got to get a woman or a person of color on this ticket, and that's who's going to win. And that, I think, is part of the motivations, as if he really continues to emerge as a front runner and gains even more steam, I would say that it would be interesting to see if we get less criticism of him from those who want to be either vice president or maybe just, ambassador to a pleasant place. He's going to need those too.
I think that's very realistic. And, I think someone like Kamala Harris is, let's be honest, she's running for vice president. She has no shot. Her numbers have tanked completely since she entered the race. Her fundraising capacity is crippled by the entrance of, 21 other candidates. She doesn't have a good base among African Americans, surprisingly enough, because she's not really sort of a pure, true African American. She's got a Haitian background, European background.
Not to mention the prosecutor stuff that doesn't,
Sorry, I didn't. I said Haitian. Well. I said Haitian. I meant a Jamaican, and of course that was a big deal a while back when she talked about how she grew up in Jamaica. And the answer to the question of whether she had ever smoked ganja, she said, "Hey, I'm from Jamaica. I mean, are you kidding me?" But look, you're right. They're all running for vice president, essentially beyond him and Bernie. And Pete Buttigieg, for heaven's sake, the mayor, the gay mayor of South Bend, Indiana, who's married to another man, is running third in New Hampshire. So, I think to say that, Buttigieg, it runs third out of a field of 22 says a lot more about the remaining, 18 candidates than it does about Buttigieg. To be sure.
We say booty judge here on the Uprising podcast.
That's right. Here, right in the confines of the Uprising studio. We say, in the Uprising, we say booty judge.
Exactly.
It's better clickbait. But
it was Andrew Sullivan who taught me, in print, by the way, to say it that way, just to be clear, because I legitimately looked for how to pronounce this person's name, and I came across his article indicating that was a shortcut way to get close to the pronunciation. So,
we're radio people and TV people as well. Early on in the race, they had to put what they call pronouncers after Buttigieg's name. In other words, you spell it out phonetically, because there's no way you're going to nail it if you're not looking at the phonetic spelling,
right,
or you don't already know how to. Well,
it wasn't just the polling for votes; it was also the race for the dough that Biden did well with this week. Is that right? Tell us. I know that he went out to the West Coast. What do you have to report about that trip?
Well, consistent with the Trump plan to Clintonize Biden, he fell right in line with that this week, did the immediate past vice president by going to Hollywood for a fundraiser which raised $750,000 in one night. Now, this is the kind of thing that Hillary Clinton was famous for. She spent a remarkable amount of time at elitist fundraisers during the 2016 campaign. And that's an underrated element of her campaign, but was, very evident to especially the voters in flyover territory who had, you had 206 counties in this country, Scott, that voted for Obama twice and then voted for Trump. Try to explain that.
It's so hard to understand how white supremacy so rapidly enveloped those areas, Tim. It's really that's certainly one for the ages to kind of discover how that happened.
Well, this is I understand. I heard a rumor that is what you just said is going to be the subject of yet another congressional investigation into Trump, that he had infected or spread some kind of a virus through the air that caused this.
I think there's a 27-part Ken Burns documentary coming on that too, right before the next elections.
Queued up and ready to go. Now, there are some things. I mean, there's a lot of similarities really between Biden and Hillary Clinton, but in terms of their ideology, the fact they come out of the old Democratic liberal corporatist establishment, but there are some big differences. I mean, Biden hasn't locked up nearly as many of the big donors as Clinton did by a similar time, in the campaign back in 2016, doesn't have a big list of endorsements. And, endorsements are really important to career politicians, Scott. They still believe that because some union hack in Ohio gets up on the stage and says, I'm supporting Joe Biden, that, all the union rank and file are going to simply follow suit. Apparently, in 2016, they didn't understand that didn't make any difference to the voters, but it is important in the old time political game, which is certainly what Biden is playing. I mean, again, going back to this Atlantic article, one of the unnamed quotes from an unknown person in here said that Clinton had several trappings of an establishment candidacy, but she at least got the most out of those factors, whereas Biden is going to be vulnerable to many of the same criticisms without all the advantages of an establishment candidacy, like a long list of big donors and, high profile endorsements. Maybe he'll get them. Remains to be seen. But, I wanted to just revise something that I said previously, a slight revision too. Because it's amazing, actually, even around D.C., the number of people that I've spoken to, Scott, that don't even realize that Joe Biden had already run for president twice in 1988 and in 2008. They'd forgotten that
Biden is lucking out there, Tim. In other words, by not having to bear the brunt of the previous failures in their own memory,
But to modify slightly what I said, I hadn't realized, but do now in doing a little research on it, that he actually stopped just short of also running in 1992 and 2004 and 2016, of course. So he's seriously contemplated to the point of an up or down decision that was somewhere close to 50-50, actually now 6 times. So you do 88, 92, 04, 08, 16, and 20. So in a way, you could say that Joe Biden has been a professional presidential candidate. However, his professional credentials, Scott, based on his results in those, are really, to say they're weak would be an understatement. But
hey, he seems to have not suffered from those efforts. I mean, the guy was vice president, so we'll see what happens. Before I let you go, what's coming in the week ahead? What should we look out for?
Well, I mean, there's tremendous excitement around New York City, Scott, at the possibility of Bill de Blasio entering the race. The mayor of New York apparently feeling that there were not already enough candidates running for the Democratic presidential nomination. So he is seriously pondering becoming the 23rd, despite the fact that in the most recent poll, 70% of New York City residents, said that he should not run.
They're paying that guy a pretty penny and putting him up in that greasy mansion to run their city. He's going to spend a year and a half riding around America and do what? Take long distance calls from New York while the subway burns? That's a good strategy.
Yeah, well, that's what he'll say. Well, that just proves how much they love me as mayor because they don't want to lose me to the White House.
Okay.
Bill de Blasio. So to give you an idea, Bill de Blasio, if he enters the race, the far left mayor of New York City, he will be considered, Scott, sort of a moderate. Even though one of the most famous things about him before he first ran for mayor is that he's an open supporter of the Sandinistas in Nicaragua. Early and often did he support the Sandinistas. Of course, that's been overlooked.
Hey,
but
he supported the Sandinistas, and Bernie went to the Soviet Union on his honeymoon. Yeah. If he can make it there, he can make it anywhere. From parts unknown. Uprising special correspondent to the Joe Biden for President campaign, Tim Donner, thank you very much for joining us.
Always a pleasure. In fact, a guilty pleasure, Scott.
See you next week.
Indeed.
Well, before I sign off, a word on Gerald Nadler and his contempt citation for President Barr. Yes, I'm sure that Robert Barr is contemptuous of Congress, but there is no constitutional crisis, and there's one way to tell whether there is a constitutional crisis or not. It is that when Eric Holder, Barack Hussein Obama's attorney general, did the very same thing that William Barr did, which is to say he told Congress to go pound sand when they demanded some documents of his Department of Justice, they didn't think it was a constitutional crisis then. So we know that the Republic can withstand such an onslaught, and we can rest easy on that point. The Uprising is a production of LibertyNation.com. Please visit LibertyNation.com for conservatarian news and analysis, other podcasts, including The Rabbit Hole and Liberty Nation Radio. If you like us, please like, comment, and subscribe. Bye-bye.